This is kind of going to be a unfiltered, relatively unedited, long-form video showing all the paintings that are in this year's studio sale. So I think I counted 55 small ones, judging by all the photos in the catalog. And then I also have what I'm really excited about, 5 larger ones. These larger ones are 16 by 20s. It's always been a goal of mine to work larger and plein air. And one of the funnest parts about this trip was being able to do that. And I feel really good about those paintings, and those are also going to be included in the sale. So the sale is based off of 2.5 months in Italy. Once again, super fun. It's just a dream to be able to do that. I spent a month in Florence, a month in Venice, and then a few weeks with some friends down in the south of Italy near Paestum, some Greek ruins, and then also some landscapes and very idyllic little villages. And overall, I feel really good about the collection, this body of work from this year. I think I'm really happy to say that I still feel that I'm still getting better and improving, and I'm always trying and thinking about what it is that I'm doing and trying new things and trying to tackle more different subject matter. And I think some of the statues, the figurative statues that I did this year were really tricky, and there are a few flunks, but overall I'm happy to share some of those. And yeah. So I'm just going to get right into the paintings. I'm going to go through all the paintings that I have, and I'm also going to be giving some thoughts and commentary on what the individual paintings were, maybe my thoughts on considerations that I had while I was working on them, things I learned, things I picked up, goals I had, stuff like that. Just my point of view on my own work as an artist. So first off, from this big stack, I've organized it roughly into subject matter, so nocturnes, interiors, canal scenes, things like that, and roughly start to finish. The first painting I have is this painting from the Loggia de Lanzi. This is actually the first painting that I started when I flew in back in April into Italy. I was jet lagged coming from New York to Italy, a few hours behind, and I decided I wanted to do a whole bunch of nocturnes. And this was something that I already had on my mind for a while, ever since walking through that main square one of the last times I was there. The lighting within the loggia remains really consistent. And so that actually is a big plus when we're painting in plein air. During the daytime, the lighting moves, the sun moves. During the nocturnes, the lighting stayed fairly consistent. However, I kind of underestimated how challenging the drawing would be, and I ended up having to spend a whole lot of time reworking this. It's essentially sort of a figurative painting when you're working on a figure like this, and capturing the gesture is really difficult. So it was more than just the one session that I spent on it. I touched it up a little bit when I got back, and then a little bit on a second day. So there's a lot of time that went into this painting in particular. But by the end of it, I realized that having picked such a challenging subject matter forced me to really step up to the plate, and it even got my brain working in a way which I hadn't quite felt before. It brought me back to the academy when working on a figurative study. Your brain's almost clocking into overdrive in a different gear, and you're thinking about the gesture and the shapes and the way that the forms sculpt together in space, and trying to capture the same feeling of what you're seeing onto your surface. And that was much the same experience on these next few paintings. So this is the Polysena grouping. And so this is actually the same statue as back here. So this time, here I tried to push it away, out of focus, and here I really gave it its own painting, its own cropping. One of the cool things about painting in Florence is the big community that was there. So I think this was the second or the third painting, I forget which one was next, but I remember this painting being inspired from a watercolorist painting that I saw from my friend Simon Schmidt, who's a painter living in Florence. He did a really epic lion scene, and so I had to try my hand at doing one. And again, this is one of those paintings where I was clocking back into overdrive, thinking really about the design of these shapes. This was sight-sized vertically, thinking about the way that the shadows connected into the lights. It's a part of my brain that really wasn't that active when I'm working on seascape paintings or maybe even more landscape paintings. But when we're working on figurative paintings or even paintings of sculptures, it brings me right back to the cast room all those years ago. Another painting, which was similar, was this one. This is the Giambologna grouping of the Sabines. And this was vertically site size, and site size is something I tried using a little bit more of because, kind of bringing back into my student days, I realized the most important thing for a lot of these paintings was having a very refined drawing. Another thing, I was working a lot of these paintings on tone surfaces, so you could see a little bit of that tone peeking through, and working some more transparent areas, some more impastos in the paint area. All of that was very helpful. And the last painting from the loggia, this is actually an evening painting. So those were nocturnes, and this was actually the last painting I did from Florence. Also the Perseus. I had a lot of fun painting the Perseus, and I really noticed that the bronze had a very particular character. The color of the bronze was really dependent on the color of the sky, whether the sky was overcast or whether the sky was blue or whether there was a little bit of sun reflecting or the light buildings. And at this point, the light was fading and there was a very blue sky, which really pushed the greens and the blues of the bronze. Those are sort of the statuaries from the Loggia de Lanzi. There are 5 of those, and next up are some other sculptures from other places in Florence. So this, as you may notice, this is one of the larger paintings that I had brought back. This is a little monument that's become somewhat of a favorite for me to paint because of the figures and the surrounding setting, and especially when the light is hitting. This is actually the opposite corner. So standing about 180 degrees across from it. This started out as a workshop demo. I had a few workshops going, one in Florence, one in Venice, and those were a fun 4-day weekend for me to teach, and that basically helped me be able to do this trip. So for me, it's that's another important part. And I might keep doing more of those back in Italy, so there's a workshop mailing list if anyone's interested in those. But this painting in particular, somewhat of a similar subject, capturing the light of the morning falling on the marble and the various different tones. What was interesting about this painting is it started as a workshop demo, and I didn't expect to be teaching comparative measurement and counting heads and building out a figure, much like the way Solomon J. Solomon recommends it in his book. I didn't expect that, and I'm not sure a lot of the workshop students expected that, but that's what this painting was. And then I came back because I really wanted to refine the light and the sense of warmth, and especially the rim lighting all alongside this figure. So this ended up being, I think, a 3-day painting. I went back to it 2 more days. And another example of a painting that was somewhat site-sized. I ended up site-sizing a lot more on this trip than I normally do, and mostly because of the drawing that is requisite for architectural or sculptural or figurative subject matter. Drawing is the most important thing, as artists have just yapped about for ages, whether you go back to like Degas or any of these quotes. It really is the most important thing. This is somewhat of a monument. Whoever sculpted the statue that sits on top of this monument, and this is outside of the Medici house by one of the other big churches. I forget who that was, but I just remember knowing that the top monument was mocked relentlessly when they installed it back in the Renaissance. But I really enjoyed this bottom part. There is a scene of some figures and some animals and some trees, and again, the light, the shadow, the warmths and the cools, focusing on the stone and the natural material and those sculptures, which are works of art in and of themselves. That has been a common thread for me when I go to Italy. That's one of the common things that inspires me. So next up we have another little scene. This is actually the fountain in Piazza della Signora. And so this is this main statue of Neptune. And some of you might realize that this is standing in the feet of where Sargent painted, except Sargent looked a little bit off towards the left, including the bronze at the corner. I really wanted to find a way to paint those bronzes, but I just wasn't really enjoying the rhythms. And this painting went through, I think, 3 or 4 iterations, or actually started one of the bronzes of these corners of the fountains way off to the right. It wasn't quite going. I flipped the canvas 90 degrees. I tried painting the bronzes on the left. It still wasn't quite going. Then I decided to settle in on the base when I noticed how the light of the spraying water really caught my eye. And it sort of went going, and then I lost the light and painting into the twilight, and it wasn't really all that great. But then on finally the fourth attempt on the next day, and I think even on the third day, it's on some finishing touches, I really felt I finally caught the sense of light that I wanted to. And especially the clouds and the blue sky and a little bit of the mist, barely being able to make out the horses there on the left. One of the paintings I'm happy about in the end. Another sight-size scene, the goal of this painting was to actually capture this banner. This is the Pandolfini auction house, and if you guys walk through Florence and you walk down this street, down there, that's where Lion's Den is and a few other little markets and restaurants, and here you're walking from that main street where you turn off from the main cathedral. The text never got there, but I am happy with the sense of light and especially the sense of temperature and the material of the old stones that Florence is built out of. And, you know, the little glass lanterns, those are there at the streetlights. This is a painting that never really got off the ground. This is the monument in Santissima Annunziata in that piazza, the equestrian monument for, I think, one of the Medicis with the arches in the back. It was raining. I was looking for a place to paint with a friend. Never really got off the ground on this painting. It was very uncomfortable, cold, shivering. And lesson to the wise, always make it easier for yourself. Be prepared, because if you're not in the right headspace, if you're not dressed up warmly enough, that has a downward effect to your paintings. So, lesson learned. Also in Santissima Annunziata is this painting. And so Santissima Annunziata is on three corners surrounded by colonnades, and these vaulted ceilings. And so looking towards this, I'm looking towards the orphanage. I think I was actually, no, I think this is a slightly different part, but these arches, those vaulted ceilings, this was a painting on the inside of those vaulted ceilings. This is towards the entrance to the main orphanage. I was really caught by the outdoor fresco onto this vaulted ceiling and a little bit of a bust and this pediment. I thought it was a really interesting subject matter. This was also one of the demos from the Florence workshop, which I came back for to work on a second day. And so obviously a lot of considerations on perspective, shift in color temperature, shifts in value, unifying certain values, allowing a little bit more of the light on this side-facing plane, a little bit more of the atmospheric shadows in the vaulted ceilings, but there's a little bit less light going on. One of the paintings I liked. Particularly painting frescoes and painting stuccos, that's one of the things that also sort of drew my attention this time around. I tried doing a little bit more of it, and you'll see a few more examples of that. It's really fun always to take a subject where there's a crazy, crazy amount of detail and information, such as this stucco. There are multiple figures, all this architectural detail, these elements of the pediments and all this sort of stuff, and trying to find the simplifications for that. That's one of the things I enjoy the most when I'm out there painting. Now, moving on to other street scenes throughout Florence. You know, if you guys know my work, you might know how much I like painting doors. This is the main portal door of Santa Croce during the sunset, as the buildings on the opposite part of the piazza their shadow starts creeping up, and trying to capture the warmth and the color and the coolness of the shadows, and trying to find that transition, I think, was always something that's kind of tricky. And generally I like to paint with my subject matter in the sunlight. This is a tricky scene to paint because your painting is going to have to be in the shadow by the time that these lights start creeping up onto that wall. Let me actually put that back. Let me focus on some other paintings of the Duomo. So I have also similar scenes from the evening of the Duomo with cast shadow of the baptistry creeping up the facade of the Duomo. And same here. This is actually a similar scene painted a week or two after the fact. Here you could see that it's a little bit later in the afternoon. The baptistry has moved over a little bit to the right because the sun sets, it doesn't just set downward, it moves a little bit over in the sky. And so this is a little bit later in the day than this one. Very, very fleeting effect. But really, between the three of these paintings, so the first one that I attempted was of the Portal Door of Santa Croce. And then this was the first painting. I only spent a session on this painting of the Duomo. And by the third painting, I felt I really got a better handle on capturing the color and the light of the shadow. Other views of the Duomo. So some smaller scenes of the Duomo. This is one of the smaller portal doors, I think off of the right-hand side. One of my favorite spots to paint is actually at that right in front of the Duomo, but facing it off of the south, you get a nice sideways angle, and you'll see a much bigger painting later on of that. And one of my favorite paintings of the Duomo from this year, painted with a good friend of mine, Xiao Li. She's a great painter, studied at Angel Academy in Florence. This is a scene of the north side of the central part of the cathedral. It seems that whenever you're in Florence, they're always cleaning a little bit of the Duomo, but it was this part at the back that goes down into the street where it seems that they just never got around to cleaning the marble for whatever reason. And so throughout the marble, even though in the front you have these really nice, clean, white and green and pink marbles, out back here in the corner, you get this really lovely patina and this really lovely color. And so I had a lot of fun trying to capture that sense, because as beautiful as it looks when it's really clean, there's just something about the character and the color and the material when it's still a little dirty. So some distant scenes of the Duomo. This is from a very secret spot. People asked me not to share where I painted this, so I won't, sorry. I really enjoyed painting these roof tiles, trying to capture the depth and the distance from this big Duomo in the back and big epic clouds, and a little bit of the tiles in the foreground and in the midground, and show how those recede in space, and also ever so slightly control my contrast. So if you look closely, you'll notice how the range, the contrast between lights and shadows here in the background, it decreases as it goes from the foreground into the background. In the foreground, I have the most contrast just between the elements and the little tiny shadows and things like that. As things go further away, you know, the bell tower, that contrast within these big masses has to decrease. This is somewhat of an unfinished sketch. This is also a workshop demo that I just really enjoyed, how I captured these little hills and the olive trees and the oaks and the variety of greenery in here, while leaving a little bit left unfinished, left for the imagination, leaving this largely in a more sketchy place. It's a fun memory for me. But if anyone wants to give it a home, it's available. This was sort of a demo. This was a demo for my Patreon, my online students. So for a lesson in painting greens and landscapes and working from a color study into a final painting. This was done sort of out of necessity, but it is a really lovely park right alongside the Arno. If you look far back enough, you do see the Ponte Vecchio, but because it's so small, I didn't give it much focus in this painting. And it's just a nice little typical landscape that was for a demo. Now, the one other little typical landscape that I have from Florence was this. This was in an oak grove, or excuse me, this was in an olive tree grove. This is obviously not an olive tree. I don't know what this kind of tree is, even though at the end of this trip I was really trying to pay attention to what different types of trees are what. But this was a very fun day painting with a bunch of students from the Florence Academy of Art. That's one of the schools in Florence, and I have a lot of friends there that are really, really great people and lovely community. My technical alma mater is Florence Academy, but I never got the chance to actually study in Florence, but it's lovely to connect with those. And from the same day, it's actually this interior. So this interior of a little Florentine building. And I just loved the cast light falling in from the arched windows and the depth and the atmosphere, and also the slight vaulted ceilings as there was the bounce light and the gold frames on these mirrors and these paintings and the couch. And This was a it was just such eye candy. It reminded me of something John Singer Sargent would have painted, and it was just absolutely irresistible for me. So that is all the paintings from Florence, all the small paintings from Florence. Actually, no, that's not the last Florence painting. This is the last Florence painting. This is a wonderful little interior of Orsan Michel. Now, the story behind this, it's not every day that you get to paint inside a church. I met up with a friend of mine to go painting in the morning. The weather was kind of iffy, and we were looking for an overhang or someplace we'd get some cover in case it starts raining. I've painted the exterior of Orsan Michel before, and I thought maybe let's go back there. And from the back side, there's a little bit of cover from the neighboring building and this little archway that leads up into the above floors. But my friend started talking to the guard, and he said, well, why don't you just paint inside if you're afraid of the rain? And we sort of jaws dropped, figuring out, are you serious? And we did, and it was really fun and really special painting this altar. Not an active church, but nevertheless, the stained glass windows and the marble sculpture, it was just a real treat to be able to be inside such a solemn, holy place. And it was, I personally enjoy it for personal reasons. Anyway, that is the last painting from Florence. To sort of continue with the lineage, there was one church that I was allowed, which I asked to paint inside in Venice. It's a very big church, the Frari, but it's a very active church, and it's in a place where it isn't very touristy. Obviously, San Marco or... No, excuse me, not the Frari, San Giovanni. I think the Frari is where there are all the Titians. They did not let me paint in the Frari with all the Titians. They said, no, no way. But this is San Giovanni. There's a beautiful altarpiece and beautiful windows and the light streaming in, causing the shadow and then lighting up that area. And so the thing is, I actually painted the exterior of San Giovanni multiple times, 2 times actually. And so that is what it looks like. So there was something about the exterior that really caught my eyes. First off, the different materials is something that I'm really drawn to. So there were different types of marble, and obviously the green, dark green Venetian painted doors, it's very typical, the stones, the brickwork of the facade that's broken up into seemingly 3 layers of these bricks being in very good condition, some dirtier bricks that are a different shape, almost missing a little bit of the mortar in between them, and then a top layer in the back, and then a bronze at the tympanum above the door in between these decorative arch. So this was actually the first painting from Venice. I met up with Kyle, we painted this a bit, and then we painted something else. The second painting that I did of the same scene is here. And so this was a slightly different color cast, slightly different key, slightly different weather, different light on my palette. And so you can see there are some differences in the color between these 2 paintings. This was one of the demos for my workshop in Venice, and there was a really nice place to grab lunch right after the morning, and that was a lot of fun. But you'll notice in Venice especially, I was painting a whole lot of doors. There's something about doors where they have a front and sides and a top and a bottom, and they have all these different planes, and usually there's color bouncing and into the different places, and there are different materials. This is a little door leading into the canal. I think I ignored or edited out a boat from this scene, but I was very much focused on the sense of light, the texture of the marble, a little bit of the texture of the greenery, this grate that's both in light and in shadow, with the cast shadow and the white buildings. It was very fun to paint that. This is another door, a bit more epic door. One of the things about some of these churches is you don't realize how large there are. I should have included some small people for scale coming in here, but this is one of the more decorative white facades. Throughout Venice, you have all this white marble and white limestone. I think And so, especially when it comes to the white facades, the varying color, the warms, the blues, the reds in the shadows, the refraction that's in our eye, all of that is always really fun to paint. And always focusing on material, the different types of light, that's really key. I think to backtrack a few paintings, specifically to this one of San Giovanni, that's one of the big things about this painting and this trip in general is I was thinking a lot about how can I skip all that messy middle part of the painting where I'm working in shape and color and trying to piece things together and get to that end stage where all of a sudden my painting starts to feel real in my mind, where I'm no longer thinking in terms of shapes of color, but I'm trying to feel what it is that I'm seeing, feel the material, and capture and recreate that feeling within my painting. And so for here, I was looking a lot at different ways I could apply the paint and paint the different types of material, such as how could I capture the marbling within these columns versus the feeling of the brick over here. So one of the biggest considerations, one of the biggest things that I was thinking about throughout all of these paintings. Now, this is a little door. I forget what this is, a monastery or something similar, but this was a little door adjacent to Santa Maria Salute, standing in about the same spot where I painted this, which was about the same spot where Sargent painted one of his most famous watercolors of Venice, of this crop in of the Santa Maria de Salute, the Basilica. And if you guys don't recognize what is the Santa Maria, it's that big dome-shaped thing that's an octagon, which is this. So I had some nocturnes of that. And then I also had some morning paintings. So standing in the exact same spot, I actually tried to do as best as I could to position it exactly in the same spot on my canvas to create some sort of a continuity, a conversation between these two pieces. It's interesting to paint the exact same scene, and I wanted to do a few more of these, but I ended up just getting the two of them on this trip. Other views of the Basilica. So this is a favorite spot. This is a spot that I think I painted on last trip. I made 3 paintings from this spot. And this trip, it was interesting to compare and contrast some of last year's paintings with this year's paintings. I was working generally on better surfaces this year, so working on more oil-primed linen. And I have a separate video talking about all the oil-primed linen and how I prepare all these paintings, so they were a lot better for me to work on, but you guys should have seen that, or if you don't see it, check my channel, or I'll have it linked at the end. Working on the different surface rather than just on Canson oil paper, that helped make a difference. It helped me work a bit more texturally, get more impastos, and some of these impastos really lent to the richness of the color. And yeah, I think if I compare and contrast last year's painting with this year's painting, I think I have gotten a lot better at capturing the feelings of things and color and light, and I'm more attuned to what I'm seeing. And I'm pretty happy with those. This is a very quick painting on the Grand Canal on the Academia Bridge in the morning, trying to capture this scene, sort of rushed, but makes it a little bit freer. And you can see all the brushstrokes and very muted, very close range palette for this painting. Other scenes alongside the Grand Canal. So this is a church. This is something I painted last year as well, trying in the evening, trying to capture the scene as John Singer Sargent saw it. This was painted in the morning. This was a demo for my workshop students, and it's, you know, it's a beautiful scene, a lot of marble, a lot of light happening, very careful measurements. So it was a good spot to bring them, and it's something that I enjoy painting as well. I remember last year they had this part covered up, so I sort of had to crop out from that part. But here, you know, they're always renovating things through Venice. I was able to capture the white part of this building, and so it's a bit more complete. Scene of the Grand Canal. This is also from the Academia Bridge looking the other way, somewhat midday, about 2 o'clock. Full sunlight blasting on these paintings, on these buildings, shadow on the left. And this is looking over towards San Maggiore. This is technically the Grand Canal. It's past these crowds of people, and then across it you see San Maggiore and the bell tower. I was sitting at the base of the Campanile for this painting because I figured out this little hack. When you're sitting at the base of the Campanile, they don't kick you out from the square. Otherwise, when the police is walking around, they do ask you to not be set up with easels standing in the middle of the square. But for whatever reason, sitting at the base of the tower in San Mark's, they were walking right past me, and it seemed to be all good. So that was really fun. This is a scene where I started towards the evening. You could see the evening light on the back of these clouds. There were some fairly big stormy clouds in the top. Might be a scene I turned into a studio painting off of some reference that I got at the end of the session. It always feels like, especially at the end of the day, the subject only gets more amazing as it gets later in the day, and you always sort of regret starting the painting when you did. But other paintings from sitting at the base of the tower, I was looking actually towards San Marcos, excuse me. So looking towards the main thing, looking at the 4 horses and the arches and the different material, the gold, the sky. I really liked how the sunlight was blasting these and creating them to be much brighter than the clouds in the back. And keying those clouds slightly darker really captures a lot of atmosphere in that sky. Another painting that I finished on this trip is also from San Mark's. And the thing about this painting is I actually started it last year. But I never got to finish it. I only had one session on it. I tried retouching it when I got home, and it just didn't come out. But I really thought that the composition was interesting, the repeating arches, and also the material. If I could only nail it, it would be really nice. And so just at the final hours of the day as the sun's setting and we're getting these stronger shadows here within the arch, on the mosaic, warmer light across the facade, a little bit of reflections of the gold mosaic, and just capturing the different materials. So the gold mosaic that isn't reflecting the sun, but it's in light and it's in shadow. And in here, the gold mosaic is reflecting the sun, and it's making the surrounding parts of the building, which are being in full light, they look really, really dark. It was an effect that I had a lot of fun with. And I'm happy that I was able to bring it back and actually finish the painting this time around. Now, the last painting from St. Mark's Square, is this cropping of the Doge's Palace. When I was there this year, they were doing some construction, and they had these little barriers set up with white nets, and they were digging up the tiles and fixing something, I don't know what. But when I connected with a painter for an afternoon and we went out painting, we actually hid behind that little white netted fence that they were putting up throughout the square during construction, and we were actually able to paint standing in the square looking at this grouping, which I don't think I'd be able to do a second time if it wasn't there. So this is the corner. The exit from the Doge's Palace is right there to the left, and they're facing St. Mark's Basilica over way off to the left. And it's the corner of the Doge's Palace. There's a knight and a little child and some figures. I don't know the actual story about this, but again, working on these figurative statues, it's a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun trying to be a bit looser in losing edges and finding certain edges in this piece particularly. And it's a very muted palette. There are hints of greens and purples and oranges, but overall it's a very narrow range, which was a fun painting to try. Moving on to other statues from Venice. So these are some lions. So this is one I was really happy with. This was a single session, and I was really happy with how I managed to capture the foliage and a little bit of sky and the buildings and light. However, this stone lion was somewhat in shadow, but it was getting a little bit of light on this right-hand side from just the ambient light of the sky. As the sun was setting, it was a very warm sky. And some of these shadows had such a nice milky depth to them where they're really warm because they were contrasted by the intense dark blacks of this foliage and shadow. So right now it's a little sunken in, but when it is varnished and also when it's photographed in the catalog, you can enjoy it in its full color. But I really liked this idea of losing your halftones where you are modeling, but the color you're modeling with within these accents is just an off value, and it's nowhere near as dark as some of your darkest darks. It's another thing that is easily forgotten about when you're not painting casts all the time, but if you look at some really good cast paintings from academic students, that's one of the things that we need to stress, that the shadows aren't flat. There are different values within the shadows. And so just the variety of the values of this shadows between the eyes, between this part that really, the mane and the ribbon that's hanging down and the other halftones, really enjoyed that painting. The next line that I did from Venice, and this seems to be a favorite from Instagram at least, is this bronze line. And so it was really interesting to try paint a little bit of bronze in Florence, and I got more opportunities to try to paint some bronze subject matters when I was in Venice. And this is from Campo Manin. This is a little monument where I decided I didn't really like the composition with all of this stuff around it, and I really wanted to just focus on this bronze statue of the lion and the patina. And so I worked on this really medium warm tone. This is on Archer's oil paper, and really focused on just capturing the lion. And I'm really happy with how it came out. It might be cheating to only have painted half the painting, but I think it's nevertheless one of the best paintings from the trip. But it's really being able to focus on just the subject matter so intensely. Very, very helpful. Another bronze from this trip is the tympanum of San Rocco, I think. I forget. This is one of the small church just around the corner from the Ferrari. And here is this semicircle bronze frieze, multiple figures, angels, cherubs fighting it out, doing whatever. Again, overcast lighting, focusing on warms, cools, focusing on a lot of the drawing, focusing on losing edges and finding edges and playing with detail and controlling that. And again, in the surrounding architecture, implying some of the architectural details, some of the elements of the facade, going for a very symmetrical composition. So they say never to put something dead smack in the middle. There are some exceptions. And very much a decorative piece rather than a more dynamically composed painting. But I feel that, I think it captured the sense of the architecture quite well. This was a 2-day painting, if I remember. And I had some other statues of just the white facades. Venice just seems to be littered with these white churches and sculptures, and I think there's a lot more I could do if I go back for even another time. This painting was one of the first paintings I did there, and while this might not be the best painting of the trip, I think this one particularly was a really great warm-up to one of the best 16 by 20s that I have that I'll be showing at the end. So this is just one of the 9 by 12s, but then I worked on this 16 by 12, and you'll see it. White, blue, beautiful sculptures, a lot of fun. Little workshop demo. Typical canal scene. What I've started to do for some of my demos in my workshops is do follow-along demos where people can draw the exact same lines that I draw and then mix the exact same paint that I'm mixing and then paint the exact same strokes that I'm painting. And this was the first demo of the day, working on comparative measurement, stuff like that. Not the most interesting painting, perhaps, but it's part of the collection if anyone fancies it. Other canal/extra street scenes from Venice. This was painted late in the afternoon. capturing the long shadows, especially the cast shadows of the figures walking around. A painting I kind of wish I worked on a toned surface, but alas. The fish market of Venice. So on Sundays, the fish market is closed, but through 6 days of the week, it's always active and people are actually selling fish. The market itself has been around for hundreds of years. I don't know exactly how many. And I, once again, was really drawn to a little bit of the cast light, the unified light at the end of the market, but also a little bit of the transparencies of the columns, the reflected light, and how the light was filtering in, especially on the pavers at the bottom, and how they were reflecting the shadows or the lights surrounding it. It was fun for me to paint. And the last painting from Venice, this was a little nighttime canal scene, painted after dinner with some friends that were visiting in town, and somewhat of a much more looser expressionistic painting, but you could see the different brushstrokes. Even on sort of a looser painting, I was very much paying attention to the material of what it is that I was painting. So the ripples of the water and their reflections, or the patina and just the texture and the grit of the brick and the stone buildings above it. And the last part of these small paintings was from the south. So I just have a couple because we had about 10 days of painting. So again, this was my third time going down to Albinella with the lovely people that were there. This time around we painted 4 days at Paestum. In Paestum are these ancient Greek ruins. It was a Greek colony that had a very long history in Italy. And so these temples were 2,500 years old, and this was at the end of the day painting the sunlight right above, being blocked out actually by the pediment of the facade that I was looking down into. That light was hitting the inside, hitting these columns, bouncing in to the shadow of these. So this warmth and this light is not actually light, it's bounce light coming in from all the rest. And again, a very symmetrical painting inspired by paintings that I've seen from other friends in the past and done on a toned surface, which you could see, but having worked on that tone, really trying to push some of the colors, some of the purples and the greens and the reds and the yellows and the blues, trying to push the sensation of color, not capturing the average of the color that I see, but trying to capture the sensation of just how vibrant real life is. The second small painting from Paestum is this. So this is actually the exact same part of this temple, except from a different angle. So just behind this column is this part of the temple. And these two columns right here are actually these two columns right here. So slightly different angle, different time of day. This one was actually recorded. You could watch the full process on my Patreon if you guys want to see how the paintings actually get made. But again, a lot of considerations going into this one. Interesting having painted and pasted them now for 3 years, once in 21, last year in 23, and now in 24. It's interesting to see how my work is progressing, but it's also interesting to see through these other paintings how my work progresses for personal reasons. And then we painted a little bit inside of Albinella, and so we have some archways and some doors. This was entirely a plein air painting. This was a little bit plein air plus. Sometimes I do a little bit of touching up in the studio, and so you see that 9. I wish I could have painted that 9 in plein air, but overall, I'm still really happy with how the paintings came out. Especially here, the sense of color, the sense of light through this archway, the reflected light, but some of the deeper shadows at the top. So that's one of my favorite paintings from Albinella. And then I just have a few more just little landscapes. So by the end of this trip, I had spent over 2 months just painting architecture and figures, and while all that's really fun, I was just itching a little bit to get back into the natural world. And one of the things that had been fresh on my mind, especially as I was painting these paintings of Paestum, So I was very much focused on learning what it is I was looking at, understanding the different elements of the architecture, and that was already happening while in Venice. While in Venice, I was talking with one of my workshop students, and I was like, oh, just look at that thing on the door. And I didn't know what that thing was. And that was somewhat unsettling. And I wrote to an architectural friend of mine, and he said, ah, well, that's a modillion. And then I started learning what are modillions and brackets and jams and all these sorts of things. And actually, even the curves on crown molding have a very specific name to them. And once I realized that all of these things have a name, I started seeing them everywhere, and at least I think I was painting better for it, knowing what it is that I'm painting at. And I realized, well, gosh, like I know that's also the case when I'm painting greens, if I can put names down to my greens. I know that's the case when I'm painting clouds, if I understand what the difference between a cumulonimbus and a stratonimbus cloud is, or a cirrus cloud. I realized I really should get to the bottom of painting trees. And I started trying to learn all my different trees. And there's a really great app called Picture This for that. So obviously there are some that are relatively simple, like olive trees. So olive groves and a little bit of maples in the back. This is somewhat in a looser handling. And this was somewhat in a tighter handling. This is little Rolf and Mario down there in the foreground. So Rolf is artist my age, a contemporary, lives in Florence. Mario is Mario Rico, one of the people that brought the organization together and made that last leg of the trip possible, where it's a little bit of an impromptu residency bringing together artists, and it's a whole lot of fun. And the last small painting, climbing up to the top of the hill, trying to paint these olive groves and looking at the atmosphere in the region and the distant mountains in the back. And that was that for the small paintings. So aside from all these small paintings, these small 9x12 plein air paintings, they're really, really great to get you in shape. They're small exercises. Most of these are 1 or 2 day paintings. There were a few larger paintings that I was able to start and finish when I was in Italy this year. So the larger paintings are 16x20s. And so it's about 4 times the size of those smaller paintings. But I packed some stretcher bars, I rolled up some linen, and I figured out a way, okay, to get an easel that fit. And it's not the largest paintings in the world, but they're paintings that I'm really happy with. This, as I said, is a monument in San Nico. This is a painting that I did a smaller version of it back in October when I was in Italy last year. And I really liked this composition. I really liked the figures and the time of day and the light on the rim light on the figures and other parts of the statue. And I tried to work on it on a larger scale. And there were a few issues. So it was too smooth of a weave for this large of a painting. That was a little bit of a mistake working on Clausen's 13. But otherwise, I think the painting went really well. The different color temperatures, the figures, finding lost edges, finding accents, working with color instead of with form at all times. So overall, and especially trying to figure out simplifications for the foliage, being a little bit more brushy, loose, impressionistic, but keeping really tight in the figures. Happy with how that came out. The second painting from Florence, if I remember correctly, just gonna set these out over here, is this painting of St. Thomas and Jesus on Orsan Michel. And speaking of things that are opposite each other, this is actually on the opposite side of the interior of Orsan Michel, the interior altarpiece that I painted. And so this is a bronze copy of the original bronze by Verrocchio, who was Leonardo da Vinci's teacher. And so you see that I'm really focusing within the bronzes, slightly offsetting for the composition, and then paying a close attention to, again, painting with color to model form rather than value at all times. So especially in some of the texture, some of my favorite parts when I'm actually getting on to paint, some of my favorite parts are actually the texture and the varying color on the sides of it. And deciding to actually simplify a whole lot. I actually ended up losing a whole lot of detail from the bottom of the robes because they were drawing way too much attention to the eye. This ended up being a 2-day painting, but the days were very, very long because the lighting was very consistent. After the sun moves over in the sky, this was in shadow for hours, and so I think I spent like 7 hours on the first day and close to 4 or 5 on the second day. And overall, very happy with working on this larger scale on where these figures actually take up a whole lot of space in the painting as well. The last painting from Florence is a 2-day painting, and this, you guys might notice some of the inspiration. This was inspired a little bit by Claude Monet. Claude Monet's paintings of the Rouen Cathedral, where he's painting the cathedral and its marble facade, marble portal doors in varying different light, and the structure and the towers. And this was somewhat of my homage to the Duomo, trying to capture the main portal door and the left slightly northern portal door and rose window, the different features of the facade, a little bit of the shadows as well. So you can see these little bits of blues, and so really focusing on the color, keeping a tight range in value, really working with texture and color and yellows and greens and blues. And I'm happy with the light effect of this green and this green reading as if it's shadow and light. And so this was a very fun painting that I wanted to work on for a while. And I'm pleased with how it came out. And so if any of you guys want to give it a home, would be cool. But if I end up keeping it, won't be sad. And so the last 2 paintings from Venice. One of the paintings, I forget which one I started first. I think this might have been the one I started second. This is actually the hospital in Venice. And so this is actually on the same square as San Giovanni, the church interior that I painted, along with the different angles of its portal door. This is on just the other side of that. This started as a painting in light, but I ended up deciding to make it overcast. There's this beautifully intricate columns on either side of the main door, and the temperature and the depth and the tiles at the bottom and the doors, and a little bit of the frieze at the top in the tympanum, those sculptures, and all of that really, really drew my eye. And this is another example of trying to figure out what to do with all that detail. There was so much detail. I think it was the base of these columns in particular that really drew my eye, but then the rest was just pretty amazing too. It was trying to figure out how to paint something so detailed and not just render every single last thing. And overall, I'm pretty happy with how it goes. I spent a lot of time struggling on these white parts, and then lo and behold, I painted the interior of this door as well as this window within like 15-20 minutes on the last day a piece. And those are some of my favorite parts of the painting after all, especially the looseness within this window. It's funny how that happens sometimes. But otherwise, it's a painting that I really struggled to push forward. And I struggled with, even though I try to not over-render zealously, I struggle a lot with drawing and making sure the drawing is always on point. And the last big 16 by 20 of this trip is this wall of the Santa Maria Salute. So you guys might recognize this from Instagram. Painting the cast shadow of the trees, early morning light on these 3 figures, the little different bits of light that are dappling on them, the bits of reflected light, the capitals of the pilasters and the arches and the window up top, and capturing the light and the shadow. And as it comes to color, painting these white buildings where the shadows are so blue and there's warms and cools and varying accents of different colors between different yellows, and specifically this little yellow down here, and it also found its way in several other parts. Some of the warmer darks accent it, and still trying to maintain all the accurate elements of the pilasters and the capitals while even painting a little bit more loosely. This is really happy with how this painting came out in the end. And there are a few really cool tricks about sight size or perspective when it comes to this. When looking at the painting from the side of the painting or painting things side by side, that was a very clear example for this. No. And so since this video sort of also serves as a time capsule, just also talking about the trip, all of these paintings are going to be in the studio sale, but there are two paintings from Pastem that are not going to be in the studio sale just because I have things I want to do with them and I'm not ready to. And they're also in metric sizes. When we were down in Albanella, we were provided with some materials and we were provided with some stretch canvases, and one of those canvases was a 60 by 90 centimeters, which is just shy of 24 by 36. But one painting that I'm very happy with is this boy. So this massive, so this was a pretty massive painting for me. This was painted in 4 days, and yeah, it was just awesome to be able to work that large, and I was really happy with how that came out. Maybe might do prints of it someday, but for now, these are the original paintings that are going to be on sale. The sale is going to be for next weekend only. If you guys are watching this way into the future, past July 2024, then it's probably too late. Yeah, and so it's going to be on my website. Shipping is going to be free, mostly within the US. International purchases, it's going to be like a flat fee. And also, if you owe any customs, that'll be your responsibility. All these paintings will be mounted, meaning they'll be on a solid board. I have a video showing how that happens. So if you guys want to watch that, if you guys want to hear about the materials that I work on, I'm putting out a video about some of these paintings concurrently today. So if you guys are ever curious about some of the technical knowledge of what type of linen I like or what type of paper I like to paint on, I'm putting out a video for that. And yeah, other things, maybe if you guys want to paint together with me in Italy one day, I have a workshop mailing list for that. And so towards the end of this year, I'll be planning next year's trips if any of you guys would want to join. And it's always a lot of fun, so putting that out there. And I guess I should say the last thing is, if you want early access to the sale, if you're just happening to find this video organically through YouTube and not through my mailing list, because I do have a collector's mailing list where I keep people updated on work that I have available, and so they get sent this video. If you want priority access to the sale and the full catalog with the prices and high resolution images of the painting, make sure to sign up to my collector's mailing list. And if you're watching this video way into the future and might be interested in the next studio sale of whatever I make, that's also the best place to go. And other than that, I have a Patreon if you guys don't know about it. Just putting it out there. All right, I think that's everything I needed to mention. A lot of you guys probably have already stopped watching the video or clicked on something else, which is fine. But if you actually made it this far, thanks a lot for watching. Thanks a lot for paying attention to my work and seeing what I do, because it's, mostly thanks to you guys that I'm able to do this. And this last trip is just, it's amazing to be able to do this. And yeah, so thanks again, and see you guys in the next one.